my name's Katie. I'm back reading the last chapter of The Wild Edge of Sorrow. We're on chapter 9, and I'm just going to dive in. Becoming ancestors. At the center of all my sorrows, I have felt a presence that was not mine alone. Susan Griffin. Sometimes it's all too much. Sometimes the cusp of sorrows is not merely full, it's overflowing. And our capacity to stand upright is mightily challenged. We all have had or will encounter times when the events and circumstances surrounding us crash upon us, and we feel shattered like glass, reduced to sharp-edged fragments lying on the floor. Sometimes the feeling of being undone comes with a loss arising near to our hearts. The searing grief burns into our being and emerges from the love we have for the one we lost. At other times, however, this consuming grief comes from outside of our immediate world, gathering like storm clouds in the distance, and then in a thunderous clap falling on us with the drenching rain. This is the grief I speak of here. It was a recent Palm Sunday. This was a day that had been a meaningful day in my youth, honoring the day when Jesus entered Jerusalem to a joyous greeting. This day began with a feeling of melancholy, however, an anticipatory grief surrounding the well-being of a newborn child in our community. The news had come that the baby was not doing well. It didn't look like he was going to survive. He didn't. I heard about his death early that morning and felt a deep sadness swelling in my heart. I knew this tender young family was swimming in a sea of love and loss, the bittersweet tears of bringing into the world, even for a few days, someone who could open your heart and break it simultaneously. Such a fierce reminder of how fragile it all is, our bodies, our bonds, our breath. It was later that same day, however, when the bow broke for me. I was ending my day checking messages one last time when I read of the death of a man named Mike. He had shot himself. I read the line several times, stood up from my desk, and stumbled into the living room. My wife had drifted asleep on the couch but woke, took one look at me, and said, "You look stricken. What happened?" She was right. I was stricken, struck down by the news. I was panicking inside, like some vital part of my soul had just fled. I could not find the ground beneath me. I told her the news of Mike's death, and all I could do was stand there. I need to say that it was not Mike's death per se that unhinged my psyche. I'd only recently met him, and while I felt a potential friendship forming between us, I can't say there was a deep bond. I was saddened by the news, but I did not feel the deep grief I would have felt losing a lifelong friend. So why this immense response? Why was the news of his dying so disturbing? What I came to realize was that his death released a cascade of feeling I was carrying for our entire suicidal culture, our death-dealing, nature-consuming, hell-bent on our collective demise society. My interior denial systems were shattered, along with the fantasies of our somehow figuring our way through the eye of the needle in the nick of time, like in some Hollywood adventure film. For the next 2 weeks, I dragged myself through the world, barely able to taste or touch. I was walking in the shadowed land I spoke of earlier, detached and disconnected from the vitality that was evident around me. This all occurred during the wild eruption of spring. With the fragrance of lilacs and honeysuckle in the air, iris and plum blossoms blooming, and my delightful grandson discovering he could walk and dance. Everything was clouded, shrouded actually, some veil coming between me and life. The wave of sorrow continued to grow as news of 4 more suicides became known to me, along with a serious cancer diagnosis and a dear friend. Too much death swirling around me, all I wanted was to hide. I remember saying to my wife when we were talking about what was happening to me, "Can we be done for now?" I didn't want to talk about it, I only wanted to run and hide, but I couldn't. Whatever had broken had taken my old strategies along with it. I was being confronted with my own deepest sorrow. My mind grappled with an array of thoughts during this time, each thought accompanied by a corresponding emotion that made life challenging. Many of these thoughts were deeply disturbing and left me with an overall feeling of despair. This is not a condition with which I was very familiar. I was the eternal optimist, always picking up the signals of our pending redemption. Now, after Mike's death, and with all the other deaths swirling in my psyche, I could not find the way forward, the path to healing. It all looked bleak. One day, while making my way around the house, I picked up a book a friend had lent me, No Time to Lose, A Timely Guide to the Way of the Bodhisattva by Pema Chodron. For some reason, I picked it up and began reading. The words were comforting, somewhat assuring, and for the first time in several weeks, I felt a breath of fresh air enter my lungs. I wrote down one of her lines that spoke particularly to me, an opportunity to develop the outrageous courage of the Bodhi heart. The idea of outrageous courage touched me. I could feel this was the invitation that was nestled inside of this despair. I, or rather we, are being asked to cultivate outrageous courage in the face of outrageous loss. After this new feeling inside me, I thought again about the deaths that had been oppressing me. Nothing had changed. The outer conditions of death and potential collapse were still all very present. But something in me had shifted ever so slightly, allowing a new bottom to begin to take shape. I had been deepened by this descent. Despair was my human response to too much death, too many losses of friends, forests, cultures. My heart, in all its beauty and fragility, had been overwhelmed and couldn't find bottom. Now the barest inklings of renewed life were setting in. I found myself cleaning my home office, building new bookshelves, and getting everything off the floor. Movement. Getting something moving again was helpful to return to participating in the daily rhythms of life. I smiled again, could feel warmth in the loving touch of my wife, the kindness of friends, and the beauty of the world. Still, the ground beneath me felt unsteady, as though at any moment it could shake and easily take me to the ground. I stumbled upon what Zen priest and author Susan Murphy calls the cone of the earth. How do we answer the riddle of our times? How do we sift through the shards of our broken culture, our fragmented psyches, and come once again into our original undividedness and the freedom it bestows right there in the suffocating fear itself? This was the question at the heart of my despair, ripening into the vessel of my sorrow. What felt different this time was the interior experience of the grief and despair. It was not centered on personal losses, my history, wounds, losses, failures, and disappointments. It was arising from the greater pulse of the earth itself, winding its way through sidewalks and grocery lists, traffic snarls, and utility bills. Somewhere in all the demands of modern life, the intimate link between earth and psyche was being reestablished, or more accurately, remembered. The conditioned fantasy of this segregated world was being dismantled, and I was being reunited through the unexpected grace of fear, despair, and grief with the body of the earth. A short time after this, Carolyn Baker, a wonderful author and soul activist in Colorado, invited me to be a guest on her radio show to talk about grief in our cultural and planetary crisis. Prior to the show, Carolyn sent me a series of questions to ponder. This list included perhaps the most challenging question that has ever been posed to me. Contained in this difficult question were a set of premises concerning the current state of the planet, which include the likelihood of a global economic meltdown, the California drought and worldwide water shortages, the unfolding catastrophic climate change, and the possibility of near-term extinction for the human species. All of this led to the heart of the question, which asked, in light of this, some people would ask, what does it do to grieve? We're screwed. We've killed the planet. Why not just leave the planet a little earlier than planned? Why not just do a lot of mind-altering substances and commit suicide right now? Really, truly, Francis, why is grief important now? I printed out the questions on Friday night and read them over a number of times. I had no idea how to answer this one particular question. I took it with me to bed and let it work on me. In the morning, on our way to give a talk on grief at Sonoma State University, I said to my wife, I have an answer for that question. It's about good manners. I watched as she thought about the idea, and I saw her body relax. She said, that feels so right, it rings true. Good manners are not something we pay much attention to in these times. It almost feels antiquated, and yet here it was coming to the foreground as a reply to this question. It got me thinking about the place of manners in culture, in our relationships, and in the broader arc of bioregions. What became clear rather quickly is that manners, when they are expressed, are typically reserved only for other humans. The wider world of watersheds, migratory estuaries, soil colonies, and ecotones are rarely included in what it is we approach with an attitude of mannerliness. This was not always so, as is evidenced by the practices of traditional cultures around the world. For Native American peoples, ethics and manners, as they related to nature and the well-being of the village, governed a good deal of their behavior. Manners were essential in maintaining right relations with the world that supplied everything for them. A breach in manners or etiquette would result in the deer, elk, bison, or salmon feeling offended and disappearing for a time, placing the survival of the people at great risk. Ritual life and practices associated with hunting and the gathering of plants, berries, and seeds all carried serious weight to the indigenous people of this land. They intuitively knew that the greater rhythm of relations hinged upon respect, reciprocity, and restraint, that is, good manners. We too are called to recover a more well-mannered life as it pertains to the living systems that enfold us. Gary Snyder, in The Practice of the Wild, notes, an ethical life is one that is mindful, mannerly, and has style. Of all moral failings and flaws of character, the worst is stinginess of thought, which includes meanness in all its forms. Rudeness in thought or deed towards others, toward nature, reduces the chances of conviviality and interspecies communication, which are essential to our physical and spiritual survival. Snyder reminds us of the tangible connection between our ethical life and our felt sense of connection with the wider surround of hoof and talon, wing and branch. To lose the chance for conviviality with the beautiful and strange otherness that Paul Shepard wrote of is to diminish our inner lives as well as the outer world. We die a little every time we close off the heart and shut out the living world from our attention. This is where we return to the question, what good does it do to grieve? Given all the givens. Beyond the social manners that we should extend to one another, there arise deeper, more eros-based manners that emerge from the rest of the heart when we feel our kinship with what surrounds us. The title of a lovely essay by Wendell Berry says it all. It all turns on affection. How we nourish this affection is at the core of our concerns. As Snyder suggested, our physical and spiritual survival is in question. All of these thoughts were rippling through me as we came to Sunday night in time for the radio interview with Carolyn Baker. I was still uncertain how I was going to flesh out the answers to her question. When she posed it, I found myself pausing, taking a deep breath, and saying, "That is a huge question, isn't it?" I find myself somewhere between the idea that Joanna Macy puts out that we are in the great turning and thinking we should be writing our obituary. I'm not exactly sure where we are in the process. If we are in the throes of our own species' disappearance, then what it really comes down to is good manners. If we are living, then we owe it as an aspect of as an act of respect and manners to try to do whatever we can to mitigate against further damage. If our species is leaving, there will be others that remain. And if the salmon are returning, if we are leaving, then we owe it as, And if the salmon are returning, we should do whatever we can to make their waters clean and take down the obstacles that interfere with their ability to spawn. We should do whatever we can to make sure the forest can go back to being a full climax forest where all species are able to return. We should do whatever we can, and I think that is an act of deep manners. And again, we come back to the heart, don't we? My ability to feel this puts me back in a profound state of relatedness to where I live, to the watersheds, to my home. And you say, why grieve if this is the condition? Because we have to keep some sense of our deep soul obligation to the planet alive, no matter if we are leaving. I feel it is an imperative that I do whatever I can to register the sorrows of the planet. We have to remember that much of the grief that we are feeling isn't ours. It isn't personal. We are literally feeling the sorrows of the watersheds. Why do grief work? So that we can register the sorrows of the planet and do whatever we can, whatever we are obligated to morally and spiritually, to try to prepare for whatever is coming so that they have a better chance to survive and continue. They have a right to that. Everything has a right to continue, to reach forward into untold generations, keeping the dreams of our children and salmon alive, of pronghorn and prairie dog, valley oak and humpback whale, doing whatever we can to ensure the continuation of all beings is not merely the right thing to do, it is good manners. Our apprenticeship with sorrow has led us here, to the very edge of culture and the world, uncertain times we are in. We have been reshaped by our many encounters with loss, deepened and ripened. We are being called upon to gather the wisdom we have found on our long walks with sorrow and make it available for others. We must enter the healing ground as elders who have been seasoned by grief, recognizing we carry soul medicine for those who are beginning their apprenticeship. Perhaps now we can begin to build a new culture, one that honors soul and the soul of the world. In closing, I would like to share one more story from the training I led for the men who were learning to facilitate the Men of Spirit initiation process. On one night of the final week, I invited the men to participate in a ritual to honor our ancestors. It was obvious that some of the men had reservations about this, since their relationships with the deceased parents and grandparents had been rocky and painful. I encouraged them to offer gratitude nonetheless for the sheer gift of their lives. I told them that we would be drumming and instructed them to dance, move, and offer gestures to the other world, displaying their appreciation and gratitude. I also told them that at some point during the ritual, the drumming would stop, and at that point, they were to lie down on the earth. The drumming started, and for an hour or so, the men moved and danced, offering their prayers of gratefulness to those who had come before. There were tears and shouts. Some gestured wildly, others slowly rocked back and forth, but everyone was engaged in this time of remembrance and thanksgiving. Lit by a couple of torches, the men's faces were soft. An energy of healing was clearly felt within that circle. Excuse me. Slowly, the drumming came to a stop, and the men lay down on the ground. I got up from my drum, walked into their midst, and said to them, "Our vision has been achieved. We are now 200 years in the future, and there are young men standing here waiting for their initiation to begin. Our names have been utterly forgotten. No one remembers who we were or what we began in order to see this dream return to the village. They need us to hold them, to send them love and encouragement. Now from deep beneath the earth, send your blessings to these young ones. Let them know that they are being held and supported from an ancient well." The drumming resumed, and from their positions on the ground, men began to reach up as if they were holding up the world. Some slowly made their way back to their feet and began to dance again. At first the movements were small and constrained, but slowly the dance grew into an energetic pulse that sent blessings like arrows into the young men in the future. The air became electric, and the sounds of prayers began spontaneously to erupt over the drums. Time collapsed, and the reality of that moment was felt. We were doing the vital work of sustaining the life that was now present in the world. We prayed that they would find the village of welcome, and that many eyes would see them and many arms hold them during their lives. We prayed that they would find a green world, vital and alive, juicy and teeming with life. We prayed that they would know tenderness and love, friendship and beauty. The drums slowly came to a stop, but the prayers kept going. Men continued to speak and weep and reach to the living world, imploring that the young people receive what we were offering. In the end, in silence, we looked into each other's eyes and recognized that we had been changed by this ritual. We were ancestors in training. So much of this world needs our attention. So much is threatened and clinging perilously to the edge of existence. We know this is true. Grief is our witness to these painful realities. Grief is also our response that confirms our intimate bond with all creation. When we leave here, it is essential that we feel that we did all we could for the generations to come, for the sweet earth, for all we loved. When we leave here, let us pray that life will continue after we are gone. Let us hope that whales will continue the migrations they have made for millions of years. Snow geese will still follow their instincts from the Arctic to their winter grounds and back again. Monarch butterflies will swarm and fill the sky with their beauty. And whether we are in this world or have entered the vast realm of the ancestors, there will still be much for us to care for. As Rumi said, the night will pass, then we have work to do. That's it. That is The Wild Edge of Sorrow by Francis Weller. We did it. There's more here on resources. It says some thoughts on practice. Practice provides ballast, vesseling, allowing marginalized voices to speak. There's quite a bit of more writing here that I'm not going to dive into, but I really enjoyed this book. I learned a lot. It felt like a nice container to explore grief in maybe like a more measured way than therapy or something else more personal. I really love diving into the stories that Francis Weller shared and hearing about his grief circles and community work that he's been doing for a long time. So, see, I was gonna show you his photo. Here's the author, Francis Weller. That's all I want to say. Thanks for joining me. This has been a great book, and I'm glad I read it, and I hope you enjoyed it too. See you later.